Dynasty season's in full swing, so we're going to give you some tips to crush every single one of your Dynasty league. These are tips that we follow in every single one of our leagues. I don't know how many leagues you're in now. I'm in like 15 at least, and you're probably in close to 10.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of leagues, and these rules apply to every single one of our leagues. For example, our number one rule in Dynasty is to keep your head above the waves. What does it mean to keep your head above the waves in Dynasty fantasy football?
It means don't overreact about a player not producing, and don't overreact about a player producing at a ridiculous level when we know, based off of the current situation, that there may be, some settling of the dust ultimately, and us having to eventually come back to reality. We don't overreact about Jonathan Taylor not playing for the first 4 games of the season. We don't overreact about Devon Achane scoring 7 touchdowns in 3 games, because we know in general that's not necessarily sustainable. So that's kind of what we mean ultimately by keeping your head above the waves.
And honestly, in Dynasty, it's really hard to do. You see, after somebody gets injured, for example, Nick Chubb, I'm not selling Nick Chubb the day after he completely obliterates his knee. Why? Because his value is going to be in an all-time low. Let's let things settle and then make our moves. If you're buying somebody, if you go buy Devon Achane, as soon as he scores 4 touchdowns, you're probably going to be, there's a chance he doesn't do that again. There's a chance you hit, obviously. But again, the more we keep our head above the waves, the more we let things sort themselves out and see long-term instead of short-term, the better. And then our second rule here.
Yeah, our second rule here is going to be 24 first. And right now, at this point in time, Friday, November 3rd is when we're recording this. Down tier to collect 2024 first. This is if you're a rebuild, or even in some cases, if you're a contender and you can down tier from a player to get a more contending asset that's scoring more points than your current player, and you get a 24 first on top, that can be really beneficial for you for contenders as well. If you can collect those first right now, and I would even say I would even put 25 firsts in this rule as well, because usually when you're looking 2 years down the road, that's not too far down the road where you're like looking at a perpetual potential rebuild, but you're actually getting more value, and you're getting that at a discount. So making lateral production moves is exactly what I was talking about from a contending perspective. If you can get that insulated guaranteed value with the 24 first right now, you're going to be a huge fan of yourself and your moves that you made right now if you go get that first in the next 3-4 months, because we know based off of 2023, based off of 2022, 21, 20, and before that, for however long Dynasty Fantasy Football has existed, those first increase in value the closer you get to the draft, and people start paying up and paying a premium for these picks months down the road.
And it's just the most insulated value you can get. It's a guaranteed increase in value.
Yep.
You have Tyler Lockett averaging 13 points a game. That's startable wide receiver production, and he is the wide receiver like 50 on Keep Trade Cut. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Take one of your younger wide receivers that is averaging that amount of points, down tier to Tyler Lockett, and get a first on top. The third rule, a contending team is going to last you 2 to 3 years if you do it right. For example, I drafted a bunch of teams where I drafted lots of Tyreek Hills, lots of Stephon Diggs, lots of Austin Ecklers, Jonathan Taylors. And Jonathan Taylor's a good piece for any of these. But here's my point. Those guys that I drafted 2 years ago, 1 year ago, now are still relevant, and those teams are still doing very, very well. A lot of people think, oh, yeah, I can't draft a fully contending team full of old guys like Derrick Henry. But 2 years ago, people were selling Derrick Henry. I can't draft a team full of these old guys because this is Dynasty, and I want to be able to win multiple years. Newsflash, if you drafted a team that was essentially on par with a redraft team from a production standpoint and a value standpoint, it would probably still last you 2 to 3 years. That's the truth. And people shy away from drafting these contending teams because they overvalue age. Do not overvalue age in Dynasty. Overvalue production, if anything. Because what is Dynasty? It's a fancy fantasy football league. And what wins fantasy football leagues?
Points. It's the same thing. It's the
Every time.
exact same thing. And with that, when you are making trades, let's make sure that you're not doing them one for one more often than not, unless you're absolutely like fleecing someone, like someone who's tiers above someone else in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I guess go for it. But in general, we don't want you making one for one trades, because at the end of the day, how are you really capitalizing it from a market value perspective in that deal, aside from your personal conviction on the player? Because more often than not, when you see one-for-one trades, they are going to be players that are relatively similar in value. And at that point, you're essentially at a 50-50 chance of like, am I going to be right about this player or am I going to be wrong? Let's get some insurance on top of that player if it's close to a one-for-one player. But in general, we're talking about like 2 for 2, 3 for 2, 4 for 2, and a couple draft picks on the side of 2. Like, try to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit more I guess fluid from a value perspective, where not a single player directly correlates from a value perspective to another player on the other side of the trade. That way you're just kind of mixing and matching there from a value perspective, and you're not completely out if you end up losing on a guy.
Take it, for example, Jalen Waddle and Amon-Ra St. Brown, two guys that are very close together in Dynasty rankings.
Don't trade one
if
for
you
the
traded
other.
those guys
Just
one
point-
for one, for example, you have, like you said, about a 50% chance of winning the trade.
Yeah.
However, if you threw in 2 other equivalent assets, so say you did Jalen Waddle and a first for Austin Eckler and JSN, for example, then you're insulating your trade. You're making it to where you have a lower percent chance of actually completely losing that trade, because you could lose one side but win the other. Say, okay, JSN went off, but Waddle got hurt this year, so he lost a lot of value. But you have the JSN side, and you got him cheap. That's what we're talking about. One-for-one trades are, you're right, mostly based on personal convictions, and most of the time, nobody knows what the heck they're talking about. And predicting the future, if you can do it, call me. I would love a crystal ball for this desk right here, so we could just be like, what's going to happen next week? Yeah. That would be great. Don't ever trade your picks more than 1 year out. We tell people to acquire 25 first. Why? Because people are dumb enough to trade them. Are you trading your 25 first?
Not unless I'm getting a ridiculous deal for
unless
it.
It's there are obviously caveats to all of this, and it's like, unless you're getting a steal. However,
these are general guidelines.
26 firsts are being moved in deals that I see. That's stupid.
Don't do it.
Even if your contending team does last you 2 to 3 years, you don't know that it will, and why trade away your flexibility to rebuild?
Yeah, and on the flip side too, if you're the side that's getting the 26 first, what does that do for you right now? Or in the near future? Like, if you're really building to eventually contend in 2026, bro, we've got some talking to do with how you're strategizing in Dynasty Fantasy Football, because you shouldn't be, I mean, yeah, you can plan, you should plan in Dynasty Fantasy Football to be successful years down the road. That's why you don't just have a bunch of 30-year-olds on your team that are scoring a ton of points. But also at the same time, like, don't just buy a bunch of 26 firsts and load up on those only and just decide to tank for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next point is multi-year rebuilds suck.
Yeah.
They're bad. It's a bad idea, and you're donating your buy-in. If you're going to rebuild, do it in 1 year. If you're going to do a startup draft and you're going to draft a productive struggle team, struggle for 1 year. It doesn't mean draft rookies, only rookies, because what are the odds that all the rookies are going to hit next year? Very low. Now, in 3 years, maybe you'll be fine. But again, you can draft a Tyreek Hill on a productive struggle team. You can draft. I mean, that is a real interesting concept that people tend to latch to say, yeah, you can only draft players under like 24 or 25 years old when you're in a productive struggle draft. It's simply not true, because not only are you getting players that could help you in your 1 year rebuild, but you could sell those players this year and get better value for what you drafted than them. So again, don't have multi-year rebuilds. You're donating your buy-in. 1 year rebuilds or 1 year reloads are the way to go. And those are typically the best teams I see, actually, are the 1 year reloads. So,
and one way that you can avoid rebuilding for multiple years is to not trade your picks a year out. We already talked about, obviously, not trading your picks away multiple years out because you don't know the state of your team in a couple seasons. But when you're approaching August and you're getting ready to start the season, or August and September, why would you trade away your 24 first at that time? Why would you do that?
Can I give you a hypothetical?
Yeah.
In August, I'm like, okay, this team is really good. I've still got my 24 first. I'm going to trade this 24 first for a super productive running back that's
like Nick Chubb. How about you wait till the trade deadline in week 14?
There you go.
What's the rush? If you are really that good, if you are one trade away by trading away your 24 first away from winning your championship, then you can afford to wait until week 14.
Or wait until there are rebuilding teams or teams they thought were contending and that are bowing out and having a flash sale.
Right.
You get him at a discount.
Yep.
Nobody's selling Nick Chubb in August for cheap. And he's really not going to be worth anything after he blows up his knee. So, again, I try to live by that as well. If you're going to trade your picks, do it later in the season to where you can buy somebody you know is having a good year. But try not to. Yeah. You're giving away your flexibility. And if you're really contending, how much are you actually going to raise the odds of you winning a championship if you trade your first? Because you go in with what? I mean, a 20 to 30% chance probably of winning your championship. And with the amount of parity that you have in fantasy football and in Dynasty, how much are you going to raise that by getting another player like that? Right. Maybe 5%? Because, again, while that player is great and has been doing well all season, there's also the off chance that once you get in the playoffs, the week you need him, he busts. And if he does, then you wasted your first. People will build and stack these contending assets, these high-scoring assets, and give up this insulated value you find in young wide receivers and picks. But in reality, you can only increase the chances that you win your Dynasty championship so much before you max it out. And people don't really understand that. And it's not because people don't know how to play, but it's just because there is a fallacy that the more points per game you have on your roster, the better you'll do. To some extent, It's true, but only to some extent. That does max out at some point. And so my next point is going to be to avoid the middle at all costs. Either suck really bad or contend. The middle sucks, right? You may, and look, I mean, obviously once you get in the playoffs, anybody can win the championship. But if you're finishing fifth to last in the league, I mean, you're picking 105. You didn't make the playoffs. So in this year's draft, you're missing out on Caleb Williams, Drake May, Marvin Harrison, and whoever the fourth guy ends up being. You're out of that top tier of rookies. You didn't even make the playoffs. Again, the only exception to stay out of the middle is if you have a rebuild or reload team that is overperforming.
Yep, that's overperforming, and if you keep there are some teams that they've I've done some blueprints for, a lot of blueprints for.
Blueprint,
and
we should talk about that.
Yeah,
real quick.
You should do.
All
blueprint.
right, if you want a Dynasty blueprint, this is going to give you a good idea, a multi-year plan for your Dynasty team. We have tons of different sections on here, but basically we break down your roster. We sort it up into position groups. We give you positional grades, trade targets, players to trade away. We give you full roster breakdowns. We give you depth score. There is a ton of features on this thing, and again, it gives you a comprehensive plan for your Dynasty team and how to build it for the next couple years to continue to win Dynasty championships. So if you want one of these, done by us, of course, flockfantasy.com/domain. There it was. I got it. Flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain. And if you choose the Mother Flocker tier, you get your own team blueprint. Like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. You also get articles, rankings, Discord, everything. All of our Dynasty content is over there. And our Discord's a fun place to be. So
Yeah. And with those blueprints, I've seen a lot of situations where these people are 7th, 6th, maybe at best 5th, but that they're at least a tier from the top. And even if they do make a move or two, ultimately, how much is it going to hurt their long-term value? Probably quite a bit, because these teams have a lot of really nice on-the-rise young assets that I don't want them getting rid of in Dynasty Fantasy Football. And on top of that, they have 2, 3, or 4 firsts in 2024. So what's my advice in that situation? This is the caveat to this rule or this guideline, is those are the situations where you probably don't want to be selling your first right now in the middle of the season, unless you're guaranteed. Like, I just don't like that, because when you have that much value on your team and you have that many picks going into this next season in 2024, you're basically setting yourself up for 3 to 4 years of dominance after that, if you hold on to that value. And that's when it is beneficial to just sit where you're at, don't make any moves in the middle of the season unless it's helping you from a value perspective, and just be okay being mediocre for 1 year. But after that, you're going hard, and you'll probably win like 2 or 3 championships. Yeah,
you would be going hard at that point. Constantly watch and play the market. And so what I mean by this is, what I mean by this is you're going to have people overreact to players. I think the biggest example of this so far this season is Quentin Johnston for me.
Yeah.
Quentin Johnston is dead in people's eyes. I was on Twitter today, and some guy had him ranked behind Jonathan Mingo in his Dynasty rankings.
Yeah, in our Cornerstone rankings, we had him in the last tier, like the third to
last
same
tier
guy,
we had him in already.
The dead last tier, and they were like, Quentin Johnston is way too high. I was like, he's hardly even on this list. How is he too high?
Dynasty, we say keep your head above the waves, because what's happening is people aren't keeping their head above the waves, and they're getting slapped in the face by all their WADA, and it's drowning them essentially in this delusion that you have to give up on rookie wide receivers right away.
Yeah.
Or after they don't. As soon as Mike Williams went down, it was like Quentin Johnson, 15 points per game. And as soon as he did, it was done. Quentin Johnson, it was over. Yeah. Why did they draft him? He's a bust. I don't know how many times I've seen Quentin Johnson and Jalen Reagor's name in the same tweet since then. That's stupid, okay? That is stupid. And right now, again, let's go over to Keep Trade Cut and see where Quentin Johnson is, because Quentin Johnson's a guy I'm like, hey, I can get him as a throw-in right now.
Oh, yeah.
First-round wide receiver talent.
You absolutely can.
Great athleticism. Wide receiver 44. He's 22. He is 22, mind you, and he is 8 games removed from getting first-round draft capital, and he is the wide receiver 44 after being as high this offseason as the wide receiver 19.
Gosh. That's crazy, too. There's a lot of people that are telling us right now already, like, Quentin Johnson, he's already a certified bust. You know that wide receivers that don't produce more than 500 yards in the season are busts. And I'm like, last time I checked, I looked at my calendar, again, November 3rd, 2023. Yeah. We are at the halfway mark.
True. In
the season of 2023. So the chance for Quentin Johnson to get 500 yards or more is not up. That time, it has not passed yet. He is at 115 receiving yards, which is not a lot at all. And I'm not defending Quentin Johnson and saying that he's actually been good or anything. I'm not saying that at all. But everyone's just assuming that he's gonna do 0 for the second half of the season.
But even then, in his last game that we just saw, he had 6 targets, 5 receptions for 50 yards,
because they actually utilized him correctly.
They actually utilized him.
Yeah.
They were just giving him short yardage.
Yep.
And letting him go crazy after the catch. That's what he's good at.
Well, that's what he was great at in college.
And if they let him do, the team and the player are going to figure. But again, the rule is constantly watch and play the market. Because I've seen Quentin Johnson fall, and I'm like, I want some of that. We did this with Zach Wilson. As soon as Zach Wilson last year was essentially valueless once he got benched for being a bad teammate and stuff, we snapped him up everywhere because it's like, okay, you can get this guy in the 22nd round of Dynasty startups.
Yep.
23rd round. I'm like, I guarantee there's a chance he starts again. He started again. I'm flipping all my Zach Wilsons now for a lot cheaper than I got him for. Value equivalent to a 4th. Even if I flip him for 2/3, I'm like, yeah, I'm good with that. I mean, and we got bashed for putting him as a play the market in one of our play the market videos. We played it. I mean, again, you just have to, even the players that you think suck, and rarely does it not work out. The one instance where it didn't was Trey Lance. He was the outlier though. That was a safe bet. And again, watch the market. Play the market. It will pay dividends, especially if you're rebuilding. You should be a daytime stock trader, essentially, for Dynasty Fantasy Football.
Yeah, and when you are watching the market of players rising and falling, some of it is merited for some players that do fall, some players that do rise. Puka Nacua, case in point. T. Higgins and George Pickens, case in point as well, with guys that have fallen in value. Let's not make excuses for players that have year in and year out and time again demonstrated that they do not have the upside that everyone anticipated going into the season.
They are what they are. What is George Pickens? He's not a 1.
He's a 2. Can't separate.
He's a 2. I don't care what film you put in front of me. I know he can't separate. He's not a 1. When Deontay Johnson is there, he's what we saw this week or last week. 5 targets, 2 receptions for -1 yards.
Yep.
He's not consistently that bad. But again, people look at George Pickens and they're like the athleticism and the body control and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And with T. Higgins, it was always, he's on the Bengals. He's tied to Joe Burrow. all I hear all offseason. And T. Higgins, we warned you. We said, T. Higgins is overvalued. I'm not going to make an excuse for T. Higgins averaging 12.5 points per game last year, even though, he was hurt. And he played a game and he didn't actually play. Well, everybody made excuses for T. Higgins and drafted him at price. And what happened? Let's look at
him in the butt
because he's taken a dramatic fall, and this isn't a play the market fall. This is a market correction.
It's a correction.
That's the difference. T. Higgins was as high as the wide receiver 9. He's the wide receiver. He's been as low as the wide receiver 22. He's the wide receiver 20 right now on Keep Trade Cut.
That's probably what he is, a mid to low wide receiver 2.
Because he's not the wide receiver 1 on his own team.
And George Pickens, just so you know, we are not just making up the fact that he cannot separate. According to Player Profiler, his target separation rank right now is 81st in the NFL.
Okay, so don't get in the comments and be like,
don't show us a video of him being wide open and Kenny Pickett missing him, okay? Target separation happens.
I know it
other
doesn't
than just the targets.
And I know Kenny Pickett's not helping George Pickens. I'm well aware of that.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true.
Send at least a trade off for a week, at least one in every league. Yeah. You get these small market value wins. Dynasty is all about getting small market value wins because if you get 5 trades where you win by just a little bit of value, then you have won a big trade by a lot of value. That's the best way to think about it. And if you send at least 1 trade off for a week, you're going to make more trades. The more trades, the more value wins. The more value wins, the better you're going to be. If you made 1,000 trades in a Dynasty league and you had this much value in every single one of them,
then you did a good job.
Then you're going to win your league.
Yep. Take the value in your startup drafts as well. Don't go into your startup draft or even your rookie drafts after your initial startup draft and say, oh, I just need this player. Oh, I just need this position. I was in a league where CJ Stroud fell to the 106 in my rookie draft. I wanted JSN or Gibbs so bad. I don't think Gibbs fell to me. JSN did, though, and I almost always take JSN at the 106. If Stroud in a Superflex league falls to you at the 106, you take the value. Guess what ended up happening? Stroud skyrocketed in value because in a Superflex league, he has a lot of value and has been playing very well. Kind of examples like that. If you need a running back, you're desperate for a running back, and you go heavily invest in Tony Pollard, that's a bad idea. In Dynasty Fantasy Football, that is a bad idea. Why would you do that when you know that he is going to plummet in value after this season?
In Dynasty, every class is the next best class. Everybody says it every year. 2024 is already supposed to be historic. 2023 was supposed to be the class. In 2021, we were talking about it being the class. 2023 has been fine, but you have a lot of people overreacting already. 2022 was supposed to suck. 2022 produced a lot of top Dynasty wide receivers.
And a couple running backs.
It's usually going to be within, 1 or 2 good players every single draft class. Yeah. Every single time. So don't fall for that. Don't go and acquire 25 picks because that class is elite. It's not. Every class is the next best class. Just keep your head above the waves with that even. And look, for rebuilds, rule for rebuilds, don't roster running backs. Don't roster him at all. What have we learned this year? What has Jonathan Taylor's value done? Whoa. Woo. What has Nick Chubb's value done? Whoosh. If you had either of those guys, what has Austin Eckler's value done? It's gone down and then it's gone up. Kenneth Walker went down when Zach Charbonnet got. Travis Etienne. So sometimes it's going to go up. But the point is they're volatile. It's the most volatile position group by far. You do not want volatility in when you're trying to diversify in a portfolio of value. You do not want that volatility unless you're really, really risk happy. There are those people. To each their own. I'm going to say running back's not safe for rebuilds.
Yeah. And I do want to, in general, applaud the Dynasty community in general. Not all of you. But I think a lot of us have started to realize that stacks are overrated. And that's going to be one of our rules here. Stacks are overrated. If you're chasing a so-called elite stack and you're having to overpay for that stack like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, or all 3 of those guys. Or actually, last year, if you acquired Tua at a discount, at that point, it was worth it if you had Tyreek Hill and Tua Tagovailoa because Tua was cheap. But don't chase the stacks. That's putting all your eggs in one basket. That's not diversifying the stock that you have in these players. It's a bad idea. So just don't do it.
Yeah, last year you saw a lot of people like, oh, I have to have the Burrow Chase stack.
Yeah. Well, they're unpredictable too. The stacks are.
Yeah, the Burrow Chase stack lost you the first 4 weeks of the season, did it not?
Yeah.
And if you had only Burrow and Tyreek Hill, or even Justin Jefferson, you're not losing as many games. Had you had only Jamar Chase and also had
Jalen Hurts,
Brock Purdy even.
Yeah.
Stacks are overrated. And our last rule, we'll say it together.
By Chris Godwin.
In every league, in every format, on every type of team, Chris Godwin is always the best value in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Every year.
He
is the most consistent fantasy wide receiver we've ever seen in our life.
Yep. When he retires, you should still have him on your roster because he's a buy.
Go buy him today.
Yep.
That's specific advice to end this video. Yep. Appreciate you guys making it this far. Appreciate you watching. Head over to flockfantasy.com/domain if you want a team blueprint. If you do the Mother Flocker tier, we'll get you a blueprint. And you can join the community. We've got lots of people over there. We're talking with them every day. A lot of fun, so we hope you join the community. Also, make sure if you haven't, subscribe. Because if we play Dynasty Football, you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, we're going to talk about it. You're going to comment and talk about it. It just works out. And if you're subscribed, it also says, hey, guys, you're doing a decent job at this. Even though we had Emeka Egbuka above Malik Neighbors. And how dare we?
How dare we?
How dare we? We've done almost
in the middle of 2023.
Almost no research on these guys yet.
We're trying to help you guys out.
Dynasty peeps, we love you. We'll see you later. Thanks for watching.